One of the biggest signs that your business is growing too fast is when your culture starts breaking down. Hey, internet friends, it's Joe. It's time for another episode of Simplify, Focus, Scale. And today, what I'd like to talk about is the assumption that many leaders have that cultural issues are people issues, when in fact, that's not always the case. Typically, what we hear from leaders is that cultural problems are a growing pain. They're just natural, they happen as companies grow, and it makes it sound like it's inevitable. We hear phrases like people aren't bought in anymore, the team has changed. Quite often, you'll find there's one or two targets. And actually, what you'll really find is that the target or the person that's always at fault changes based on the moods of certain leaders. And that's really where I see this happen the most. And that's usually the first sign that it's not a people problem, it's a culture issue. But in most cases, culture breakdown starts when the alignment breaks down. And typically, what happens is that fast growth, for those of you who are in fast growth companies, fast growth exposes the gaps that are already there and it magnifies them. It just is a multiplier. There was really so many examples to choose from in talking about this topic. I wanted to come back to a point that I think sort of sums it all up. And the most common example of this is the us versus them mentality. That's when you start seeing leadership or management levels against the staff, or leadership against the management, staff against the management, and so on and so forth. And you start hearing the grumblings of words like, well, they don't get it. And they could be the leadership, they could be the staff. It doesn't matter who they are. But the minute you hear they in discussion to anything negative in your company, it's too late. You got a problem. And you got to put the brakes on that and you got to address it. If you don't, it's only going to continue to magnify. This often comes through a big disconnect between what the leadership is trying to present and thinks the staff is experiencing versus what the team is actually experiencing. Because the communication has to change as the growth increases. Without it, trust deteriorates, staff stops speaking up, and that's where that us versus them mentality starts to come in. So one example of gaps exposing growth that already exists was with one of my clients who was a very large financial firm, and they were being bought out, they were being acquired by a new investment group with new leadership. That new leadership came in and just assumed that they could not only integrate directly into the existing culture and change it from there, but that they needed to change the culture at all. Okay. As new leadership, they assumed that because they had the titles and they had bought themselves into the company, that everybody would respect them and just follow their lead. Now, every one of these leaders had a tremendous resume, great experience, and they were very good people. But they overlooked the fact that this was fear to the staff. So despite all of their tremendous growth plans, they fell flat on their face for the first year. So when I came in, one of the first things we did was not even to address the processes that you guys always hear me talk about or to eliminate the duplicative entry. It was to get the buy-in from the staff. And how did we do that? Well, we went to the staff first, not the leadership. And we really started to go from there and started at a grassroots, if you will, to move our way up to leadership and say, okay, here's what we found along the way. And of course, it was a mix. It wasn't one thing. But leadership assumed it was a few key players who were legacy employees that were just resistant. What was really happening was that leadership had grand goals that had never been communicated in a way the staff could get on board with. All the staff saw was change for the sake of change. So when we went in and we addressed that, and we showed leadership that the staff actually had some pretty good ideas too as to how to make things better within the framework they wanted to build. That's the important part. The staff was the one that came up with how to make it all better, not the leaders. The leaders needed to get on board with the staff. Once they did that, that firm grew 300% from a revenue standpoint in less than 2 years. It works. If you want scalable growth, it has to be sustainable. So I say all that to remind everybody that culture isn't built by slogans. It's not built by grandiose promises. It is built by consistent experiences. Consistent being the key word. Because otherwise, there's a lack of transparency that causes distrust. The changing of priorities causes confusion. And that pressure, without clarity as to why, only causes resentment. And when you have distrust, confusion, and resentment, you are not going to have a team that multiplies your efforts. So when people stop feeling safe to contribute honestly, culture starts breaking down long before your performance numbers show it. And fixing that with leadership alignment is where true growth starts. Remember, it's not about size, it's about sustainability. And that is why we simplify, focus, and scale. Thanks so much for joining me today, everyone. If you have any thoughts, you know the drill. Make sure that you comment below. Be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. New videos come out at least weekly, and I'm always happy to hear your thoughts. If you'd like to connect, feel free to reach out to me on the website at jpcoachingnow.com. From there, you can follow me on all the socials, get my phone number, email address, or anything else that suits your fancy to communicate. I'm happy to hear your thoughts, whether you agree, disagree, or if you have thoughts for something that you'd like me to talk about in a future video. Until then, thanks so much for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you next week in our next episode of Simplify, Focus, Scale.